I'm delighted to be here to speak today on the occasion of the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the relic of St Ursula to Galway. And it's a unique object in its own right, probably the skull and the reliquary skull of St Oliver Plunkett is probably the only one that comes closest, although I haven't been able to examine that in detail to know whether there's any portion of it that goes back as far as the 17th century. I'm grateful, as I said, to Galway City Museum, especially to Brendan McGowan, an old friend of mine who was in the Museum of Country Life, the National Museum of Ireland, and is now of this parish as an education outreach officer, for his invitation to speak today. But I think, following what Sister Alberta says, I must especially acknowledge on your behalf the generosity of the Dominican sisters for having donated this magnificent collection to the museum over a number of years. And I'm also glad and happy to see that Galway has a suitable museum to house this important material, which is very important, where they can be displayed and enjoyed by the public in the city where they were cared for by the Dominicans over the last 400 years and more. And I know how difficult it is, to part with such treasures. And I think your trust in the museum in actually handing over these things and ensuring that they are preserved for the future. The museum has become, if you like, the curators from you in succession, as it were, of this material. So I'd just like to say that it's so important that you have done this. As one of my special fields has been the examination of this material over most of my life. And one of the many benefits of such generous gifts is the fact that they can give a new light on material, as Etna sort of says. New research can be brought to bear on them. People be made aware of them. And I have to say that for many years, until very recently, I was myself unaware of the existence of the shrine. And I actually only saw it for the first time today. I said I have to see it before I actually speak about it. But I suppose that's part of it. You know, material is not on public display. People are not aware of it, so therefore the interest is only generated by the fact that it's published, researched, and made available in terms of exhibition. For many years I was involved in a project with UCD, Micheál Ó Cléirí Institute, in cataloguing the material of the mendicant orders in Ireland. And much of this was previously unknown. It was in safes, in cupboards, in sanctuaries and of the various Franciscan convents throughout Ireland. So it is and other mendicant orders. And through the cooperation then and assistance of the late Father Joe McMahon, OFM and the Franciscan province in Ireland, this material formed the basis of an exhibition in the National Museum of Ireland of the material in the care of the most important material in the care of the Franciscans. And I'm glad to say that even after the exhibition finished, the Franciscans were happy to extend the loan. It's still only a loan, but at least it's safe and secure. Occasionally objects are borrowed because they're still actually being used by various families who would have given them to the order. But I think it's important that this material is made available for publication and for research. So because of that, I refocused my part of the originally going to talk to, which is basically more about the relics in general, to refocus on the context of the long history and use of relics, to focus on how this fits in with the remains of foreign saints, and to assess the place of the relic and the shrine of St Ursula in the silversmithing tradition of late 17th and 18th century Ireland and Galway in particular. A lot of this you may already know in relation to the importance of relics, but just to summarise the acquisition and enshrinement of relics of saints as expressions of Christian faith, devotion, and of local, national and international identities and as instruments of political prestige was universal in medieval Eastern and Western church, and the practice is almost as old as Christianity itself. Relics could be intensely personal, and at the other end of the scale, it could be expressions of power and control. Some of the most powerful rulers, both secular and ecclesiastical, endowed churches with relics from across the Christian world on a lavish scale. Relics consist of the remains of holy persons regarded as saints and can include corporeal or bodily remains such as the Shrine of St Ursula here, objects such as bone, skin, hair, teeth, and even blood. Objects directly associated with the sainted individual belong to a separate category. These would be things like items of clothing, vestments, cloaks, or other personal objects such as crosses, croziers, bells, books, and combs. And thirdly, there are contact relics or brandia, that is objects which would have touched the relics of the saints. These could be pieces of cloth or objects such as medals or beads, which would have been placed in contact with the first and second class relics, and these then would have been distributed and subdivided. Relics in turn were encased in coverings or reliquaries, often made of costly materials and enriched with precious gems. The primary role of relics was to act as intercessors between heaven and earth, with the saint, the particular saint, the person acting as the intermediary between the individual and God. Over the century, they acquired a greater variety of functions, and these included consecration of churches and altars, healing the sick, swearing of oaths, witnessing treaties or other major events, ensuring victory in battle, or more negatively, to curse enemies. Their use in oath-taking is amply illustrated here in the Bay Tapestry, where the Saxon king Harold, standing in the centre, swears loyalty to William of Normandy, seated on the left, placing his hands on a pair of reliquaries. The reliquaries, these would have been the one on the left would have been one that is portable. You can see the projecting poles there, so they would have been carried in procession. And the example, the only Irish example that survives is the Shrine of St Monachon, which I'll show you a picture of later. These relics attracted pilgrims from near and far, generating much needed revenues for their respective churches, some of which, such as Canterbury and Santiago de Compostela, amassed huge wealth. On the other hand, there were intensely local cults of saints, many in Ireland, which would probably have only been venerated or being looked after by members of the immediate community. So there's a huge scale between the two, and also depending on the importance of the relic itself. In Ireland, relics would have had to be introduced by the first Christian missionaries. Palladius, we're told, who came to Ireland in 431 AD, brought with him relics of Saints Peter and Paul. The oldest surviving reliquaries from Ireland that we know of are very likely this pair of boxes here with sliding lids. The smaller wooden box, which fitted inside the larger of stone, and also found with it was what seems to be some kind of a pin or a key. It's not clear if this was actually found within the inner relic or what significance it had. These were found in a grave in Dromiskin, County Louth, in the early years of the 20th century. This is, as you see, a picture of a skull. But the objects are obviously placed in the grave with the individual, so they weren't part of, they were the same category as the Shrine of St Ursula. The Dromiskin reliquaries resemble those found in late antique and early Christian sites, particularly those placed in altars from the earlier years of Christianity. And the nested boxes here on the left from Bulgaria is a small gold reliquary which was set inside a larger silver reliquary. So you can see the same idea of nested boxes, and there are other examples of these which have been found across Europe, including at the famous site of the monastery of St Columbanus in Bobbio in Italy. In early medieval Ireland, the handbell and the staff of the saint became the insignia par excellence. They can be seen here on two stone carvings from White Island on the left and Killidees, County Fermanagh. The characteristic short, crook-shaped staff and small handbell held in the other. You can see, and I think the one on the right, you can actually see the little clapper of the bell projecting from the bottom. These then became the most common relics associated with early Irish saints, along with any books that were said to have been written or associated with the saint, such as the Cathach of St Columba. And these are found across the west, both in Ireland and Scotland, Wales and Brittany, and some in England. As shown in sculpture, bells and croziers are sometimes paired, as shown here, the island monastery of Inishmurray, where the wooden statue of the Saint Malasha in the centre, and you see the picture on the right where when it was actually, the statue was still in the oratory on Inishmurray. Associated with that in the site were his supposed crozier and bell, shown on the right, which is now in the collection of the Duke of Northumberland. And it's even been suggested that these may have actually been held in the hands. The hands of the figure are lost at this stage, but they may actually have been held in the hands of the statue. Handbells of brazed iron, that's bronze-coated iron, date from at least the 7th century, if not earlier. The most famous, of course, being here the bell of the will, the Clogan Uachta of St Patrick of Armagh, one of many bells associated with the saint. Enshrined at the close of the 11th century, it could be documented continuously through the centuries in the hands of various hereditary families of keepers through until the early 19th century. Over 100 of these handbells are known from Ireland, and there are records of probably another 50 or so from written sources. So what we have surviving is only a fraction of what would have been there originally. Only a small number of bells were enshrined, such as the lavish covering for St Patrick's Bell. Others were plain and well worn, such as this fragmentary black bell of St Patrick, which is in the hands of the MacBeolaun family of Killauer, County Sligo, and later in the possession of the Geraghty family. And this was brought to Croagh Patrick for the annual pilgrimage. And here pilgrims who climbed the reek kissed it and made, importantly, from the point of view of the hereditary keeper, a donation to its keeper for the privilege. So he earned an income from this. The crozier from Lismore, County Waterford, is dated to around 1118 from the inscription around the top, which names a historically known abbot of that monastery. It's the latest and finest of the 30 or so early medieval croziers that survive, but if one includes fragments, because these are objects made of individual pieces which can easily be lost. There are over 50 known from Ireland, and this again must be only a fraction of the numbers that were there originally. These croziers are not necessarily relics in themselves. They became relics by association with the saint itself. Often it was said that the wooden core of these was actually the original staff of the saint, and they were then embellished with later metal mounts. But this is proven by examination by scholars such as Griffin Murray to be incorrect, and that the actual wooden core was only there to actually hold the elements of the crozier together. Tomb or house-shaped shrines emerged during the 6th century. Based on continental prototypes, the Irish examples are particularly distinctive. Here you see two examples, the two earliest examples from Clonard, County Tyrone, and Columbanus Monastery at Bobbio in Italy. And you can see they're very close in decoration. They're quite small, they're only but slightly larger than a matchbox, to carry small fragments of relics. And this indicates that these would have been made in Ireland and then carried by missionaries to the continent containing precious objects. Later examples are much larger in size. You see here ones from Copenhagen in the top left, which is originally from a church in Norway. On the top right, from Bologna in Italy. Its history is unknown, but it's been in Bologna since at least the late 18th century. The bottom one there is the so-called Raghnall of St Columba, which is in the National Museum of Scotland, and the Emily Shrine from Limerick, which is now in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. There are over 30 of these known, and there's a growing number of them being found, both in terms of complete examples and fragmentary forms from the continent. In Ireland, surviving large reliquaries or sarcophagi capable of holding a complete body are understandably exceptionally rare, because these would have been things that would have been, if they were made of metal, would have been melted down because of their size and the value of the materials of which they were made. This here, the Shrine of St Monaghan, still retains its relics and is still kept in the saint's home parish of Lemanhan, County Offaly, and is still looked after there by the local community, and there are keepers there too who are tasked with looking after the shrine. The shrine itself is it's tent-like, but it's often said to take its shape from the steeply pitched roofs of early Irish churches or oratories. But this is erroneous. As Cormac Burke has shown, there's plenty of evidence that tents were used to house relics temporarily, and the stone slab shrines which are found in various church sites throughout Ireland, such as here, you can see in the foreground of the top photograph, it shows the same form. It would be unusual to actually detach a roof and make a reliquary of that. So they're more likely to be, if you had to give them a name, tent-shaped, as it were. In terms of imported relics, then the most important of these were, of course, fragments of the True Cross. Here is a depiction of the curing of King Louis using a piece of the True Cross. And these, like other relics, by touching the individual or the affected part of the body, they would be healed. Before the 12th century, such cross reliquaries were jealously guarded in the East, in palaces and churches of Jerusalem and Constantinople. Many were brought to Western Europe as gifts from Byzantine emperors or as loot following the Crusades. And you see a few examples here of the double-armed cross form. The cross of Cong is the most significant surviving reliquary of the True Cross in Ireland. Commissioned around 1123 by Rory O'Crohor, King of Ireland, it was made using the finest craftsmen and materials available in 12th century Ireland. The annals state that a piece of the Christ cross came to Ireland in that year, and Rory O'Connor asked for a piece of it which was enshrined in this reliquary here. The relic itself is now missing, but was originally set behind a polished rock crystal in the centre. When this was removed some years ago for examination in the National Museum of Ireland, you can see on the left a double-armed cross which is carved into the wooden core, suggesting perhaps that this was the form of the imported reliquary from which the fragment was taken, which was then inserted into the cross. The relic from Holy Cross, Abbey, County Tipperary, which features significantly, particularly in late medieval period, is somewhat more problematic. The fragment that's preserved at Holy Cross today is a much humbler container dating to the 15th century. But it would appear that there are a number of True Cross fragments associated with the Holy Cross, so perhaps the original was at some stage subdivided between smaller reliquaries over the centuries. These are taken from Malachy Hartley's the drawing on the right, history of Holy Cross, which shows the abbot of Holy Cross on horseback with a purse around his neck with the relic inside. Apart from complete remains, body part relics, which are a feature of Western and indeed Eastern medieval Christian art, are less common in Ireland than the associative relics such as the croziers and bells I mentioned earlier. One of the earliest of these is the shrine of St Lauchlin's arm on the left-hand side, kept at Donaghmore, County Cork, until the early 17th century. We get some indication of the performative role of such relics from the high cross at Dyfed OG, County Clare, which is on the right. If you look carefully there, you will see that the cross was originally fitted with a removable arm. You can see the hole there. You can see it on the figure there. There's a recess. So whether this arm was of stone or it was more likely of metal. The groove underneath it, so you can see that running down it would be the left-hand side of the shaft of the cross underneath the figure, suggests that water may have been poured over the reliquary and gathered underneath in containers and given out as blessed water in small containers or flasks to pilgrims. The same was said of St. Patrick's Arm Shrine now in the Down Museum, which is associated with St. Patrick, John Patrick originally. And the 19th century account describes how it was customary for the keeper of the relic, a member of the McGuinness family, to pour water through the elbow termination of the shrine, which, touching the relic, passed through, flowed out of the fingers, and was used as a cure for various diseases. Indeed, one of the reasons why its then owner, a convert called Colonel Nugent, whose original name was Savage and was belonging to the later hereditary families, did not wish to retain possession of the relic on account of the numbers of people who came from all parts of the country seeking cures. The shrine was also lent out in order that oaths may be taken by touching it in cases where disputes were being settled outside the courts of law. And this practice of pouring water through reliquaries is one that goes back to the earliest years in Christianity. In the Eastern Church, you get these sarcophagi which have a hole at the top at the bottom, and oil would have been poured through, passed through the relics, and would have been collected at the other end. And the same would be the case, for instance, in Canterbury, where holy water were poured into a large vat containing some of the remains of Thomas of Canterbury and taken away as flasks by pilgrims. So this is a very long tradition which goes back several thousand years. The antiquarian Thomas Crofton Croker, in his researches in the south of Ireland in the early 19th century, notes that on the St. Declan's Day on the 24th of July, vast numbers of country people flocked to Ardmore, County Waterford, for the annual pilgrimage of penance and prayer. And he was informed that a skull encased with silver was there exhibited as a genuine cranium of the saint. Unfortunately, this is now missing, but others are known from historical records. One of these was the head of St. Buihe of Monaster, boys from Monaster Buihe in County Louth, and was perhaps kept in a niche visible here on the left in the wall of the parish church. I hope you could see it. I pointed out to you there, doesn't it? See just here. And rather than being used for altar vessels, because of its shape and its size, it fits at the dimensions of a head reliquary. The reason we know of this is that in 1521 it was stolen, and the theft and the supposed thieves were tried in the Armagh ecclesiastical courts held at Drogheda. A man called Patrick McGeer, a local curate, sought to have Donlo Hiran canonically punished for having publicly accused him of sacrilegiously stealing the head. The accused in turn claimed it was his accuser who had carried out the deed, having been informed of this by two of his female cousins. Unfortunately, at this stage, the records of the case are incomplete, but the court was not called on to give judgment as the parties, some or other, settled the dispute privately. It's a bit unfortunate that we didn't get any further information. The Monster Boy's head relic may have resembled this example in the Hunt Museum, Limerick, said to be that of St. Patrick. However, its authenticity has been questioned, and it may actually date to the 19th century, be a 19th century copy of a typical late medieval French head reliquary, but it needs further study. It doesn't look, just from the actual techniques that are used, consistent with a date in the 14th or 15th century. More locally, the purse-shaped reliquary known as the Shrine of St. Patrick's Tooth or Fiachal Pádraig, which was kept at Cong before it was taken to the National Museum. It is claimed that it contained a tooth of the saint, which he lost while visiting Killaspagbrone on the Sligo coast, near where Sligo Airport is today, and where there is a parish church dedicated to St. Brone. However, a lot of these reliquaries acquired their names in the 18th, 19th century, and it's not quite clear as to how old the association is. In its current state, it dates to the 12th century. Some of the decoration resembles that of the Cross of Cong, and was refurbished by Thomas de Birmingham, Lord of Athenry, in the third quarter of the 14th century. But as I said, its earlier history is unknown. William Wilde describes how in about the year 1820, a man named Riley, said to be a native of Sligo and its presumed keeper, made a living by going about that part of the country with it, performing cures upon man and beast. So these objects went from ecclesiastical into secular and back again over the centuries. Two late body part relics were preserved by the Dominican nuns of the Siena convent in Drogheda. The first of these is this silver shrine reputed to contain the jaw of St. Patrick, which you see the jaw and the reliquary here. It bears an indistinct hallmark, which is yet to be examined in detail, but its style suggests it was made in the 17th or early 18th century, so round about the time we're talking about for the reliquary of St. Ursula. It's interesting that here, and also in other cases, how many of these were preserved in the hands of female religious orders. The second of these, preserved by the Siena convent nuns, was the so-called Shrine of St. Patrick's Thumb, a fragment of bone encased in a silver reliquary. It was given to the Dominican nuns of Drogheda by Archbishop Hugh McMahon of Armagh at the same time as the head of St. Oliver Plunkett, seemingly on the foundation of the community in 1722. So it must be around this date that the reliquary itself dates to. So very, very close in date to the Shrine of St. Ursula. Throughout the period after the Reformation, there are records of the destruction and burning of relics and wooden statues. In some cases, these are replaced by objects and images imported from the continent, mainly from Spain and Portugal. Images of the Blessed Virgin were brought from Lisbon to Castletown, County Cork, and another was brought by the Jesuits to an unnamed church, possibly Waterford, in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. Another, known as Our Lady of Healing, was brought to the Hospital of St. John, Waterford, from Seville by the Reverend Nicholas Fagan, a Cistercian who later became Bishop of Waterford. The Jesuit image was particularly elaborate and was described as, and I quote, the most beautiful statue of the Virgin Mother of God of its kind to be found in this island, skillfully carved in wood and covered in gold. Agreeably proportioned, it stands 3 cubits, that's 1.5 meters in height. In her lap, the Virgin holds the gilt boy Jesus, who has a reddish glow. A tabernacle veil carved from gilded wood and supported by 4 gilt columns hangs from the top, and the entire statue rests upon a level, stable base inside a case whose double doors are painted with exquisite images that are admirably true to life. So this must have caused quite a sensation. It would have been unlike anything else that would have been in an Irish church at the time. Smaller devotional images originating on the continent were also treated as relics. The ivory image here, known as Our Lady of Youghal, was donated to the Dominican friary there sometime after 1617. Tradition states that the worn ivory plaque at the centre was miraculously discovered in a piece of wood washed up on the sands opposite the town, and revealed to the abbot in a vision when that it was inside the block of wood when the block of wood was recovered. These miraculous discovery stories are quite common, particularly in relation to statues and images. It shows a seated image of the Virgin Child carved in ivory, and was originally part of a paired scene of such plaques used for personal devotion. The other scene might have been a scene of the crucifixion. It was probably made in France in the 14th century. It is considerably worn, as you can see, and so was of some age. Whether this was associated with the Dominican friary in Youghal since it was made or later. We know for certain that it was set in a silver casing inscribed, "Pray for the soul of Honora, daughter of James Fitzgerald," one of the Geraldine Fitzgerald, who had been made AD 1617, an inscription, and then a closing door on an image of the crucifixion on one side and a saint on the other. This miraculous image became such a centre of pilgrimage during the early 17th century that the dedication was changed from that of the Holy Cross to Our Lady of Graces around the year 1640. So in that relatively short period, it had become so well known. Relics of the True Cross in Ireland were still being brought to Ireland in the 17th century. One was given to Donald MacMurrough Kavanagh of the Kavanaghs, of the Kings of Leinster, who held a gathering of his followers on Good Friday, 1608, to venerate a piece of the True Cross that had recently arrived from Rome. Another piece from Rome was given to Owen Ruo O'Neill, in order to encourage him in terms of future victories in the field, and he was sent a small silver reliquary with fragment of the True Cross from the monastery of Santa Croce in Rome. A piece of the True Cross was kept in Waterford Cathedral at this time. A double-armoured cross with a 13th century inscription identifying it as such is encased in a silver frame inscribed in Latin. This piece of the wood of the Most Holy Cross belongs to the Cathedral Church of the Most Holy Trinity, Waterford, 1620. Whether this was in Waterford before that or whether it came in 1620, it's not known. The name of the donor isn't given in the inscription. The see was vacant between 1610 and 1629, but 1620, the year in which this was made, saw the appointment of David Roth, first as Bishop of Ossory, the first of the Counter-Reformation Episcopal appointees in Ireland, so it may have something to do with his mission to Ireland. In the case of the Arthur Cross in the Hunt Museum in Limerick, this was refashioned from an earlier reliquary of around 1400 by Richard Arthur on the occasion of his appointment as Bishop of Limerick in 1625. You see it at the top. The jewelled pieces are actually from a 14th century, whether they're from a cross or from some other object, it's uncertain. But the inscription on the base indicates that it was remade for Bishop Arthur in 1625. Its stepped jewel base resembles that shown on the 17th century history of Holy Cross Abbey I mentioned earlier up at the top there. And you can see a somewhat different take from the relic of the True Cross that we from Holy Cross that I showed you earlier. Smaller, more personal relics were brought into Ireland at this time of new saints such as Ignatius Loyola. One of the more unusual is a small silver reliquary cross, which is only about that tall, it's quite small, with the figure of St. Francis receiving the stigmat on the back. You can see the figure of St. Francis and the cross and the lines drawn towards his hands and his feet, and is engraved with the date 1638. It contains within it a wooden cross bearing a prayer in Spanish, invoking the names Christ, Mary, and Sister Luisa of the Ascension. Also known as Mother Luisa de Carrion, Louisa was a Spanish nun who belonged to the convent of the Poor Clares, an order of nuns of the Second Order of St. Francis at Carrion de las Condes in northern Spain, not far from Bilbao. The reliquary was clearly made for the wooden cross and most likely made in Spain. It's from the collections of the National Museum of Ireland, but it's not known how it came into the museum, but it could very well have been brought to Ireland. And the interesting thing is that it came within 2 years of the death of Sister Louisa. Following the Council of Trent, a series of Irish synodal decrees laid down strict provisions as to how relics and reliquaries were to be used. Synod of Rod in 1614 stated that priests should make sure that superstitious practices associated with wells, trees, etc. should be carefully watched. If it be certain that the waters at these holy wells or through the intercession of a particular saint, the power of healing or any virtue, the people are not to be prevented from assembling there. However, more particularly it warned that laymen who bring with them some pretended relics of saints, dip them in water, and then with various exorcisms sprinkle men and beasts. This is clearly an act of superstition, not of piety. So here is the Catholic Church in Ireland trying to control the use of relics, particularly relics by lay persons. This bronze or silver shoe was acquired by George Petrie at Loughrea in County Galway in the early 19th century, and he gave it the name, the Shrine of St. Bridget's Shoe. So it was believed that this contained originally a leather shoe or slipper of the saint. Originally believed to date to 1410, Cormac Burke has recently re-examined this shrine and has pointed out that the date on the inscription in fact reads 1710. You can see it there, the first line there. The 4 looks very like a 7, or the 4 looks very like 7, and in fact it is. This ties in with the iconography, the decoration and the style of the lettering. So it's now believed to be associated with the convent of Teresian nuns, founded in 1680 by Mother Eleanor Burke, who took the name Mother Teresa as a religious name. It was regarded as the mother house of the Teresian sisters in Ireland at the time. Burke has argued that the shrine was commissioned as a political counter to the Acts of Abjuration of 1703 and 1704, requiring all those to swear allegiance and to receive communion in the Protestant manner. It was one of the anti-popery acts of the penal laws. Specifically, it countered the 1709 amendment, which was only a year before this was made, which provided for registered priests to take the oath of abjuration. The sacramental oath, the juramentum sacramentalis of the Acts of Abjuration, was thus deliberately replaced on the inscription with the words juramentum naturale. You see it there, hoc est juramentum naturale, and then lochrei, there, the natural oath. So this was a deliberate counter to the provisions of the penal laws. Though the inscription mentions St. Bridget of Kildare, I'm afraid I don't have a picture of the image on the side because it's slightly damaged. The figure actually bears the stigmata, and the shrine therefore cannot be that of St. Bridget, or the image cannot be that of St. Bridget, and is more likely to be an image of St. Teresa of Avila, who bore the stigmata. The medieval parish church of St. Bridget in Loughrea and a holy well dedicated to the saint gave it a local association with Loughrea, and was perhaps deliberately pairing St. Bridget with St. Teresa. So the head of the new order with Bridget, Ireland's premier female saint. So having got this far, I don't know how much time we've left. Lot. As go to the subject of this evening is the relic of St Ursula. You see here, description reads, "Pray for Sister Margaret of the Rosary Joyce, who procured the enclosed relics of St Ursula for the Dominican Convent, Galway, on the 18th of June, 1723. It's made of silver with glass windows through which the relic can be seen. The portion of the skull is placed on a red cushion surrounded by pearls. What you actually see is the side of the skull, so that the actual front of the skull is facing to the right there. The lid bears the maker's marks RI for Richard Joyce, a well-known Galway silversmith active in the city at this period. Sister Margaret Joyce may well have been a relative of the silversmiths, and she was prioress of the convent on two periods, one of which was in 1723, the date at which this was made, so it was probably commissioned on the occasion of her appointment as prioress for the second time. Although it's said that Sister Margaret acquired this relic in Rome, I can't find any independent confirmation of this, and it is, to my mind, much more likely to have come from either Spain or Portugal, where the cult of St Ursula, which we will hear from Dagmar this afternoon, was particularly prevalent, particularly amongst the royal house of Portugal. Richard Joyce made other objects, including this silver crucifix of around 1725 for the convent. And he also made other pieces, other chalices for convents, the convent of St Clare in Galway, as well as a number of other for the Bodkin and the Brown family in Galway. Other pieces of silver were made for the Dominican nuns by a contemporary of Joyce's, a silversmith named Mark Fallon, in the 1720s and 30s. These included two silver chalices dated 1714 and 1725, the former of which also was matched with a pair of altar cruets, which are part of the collection which is here in the museum. John Lynch, a wealthy Galway merchant living in Bordeaux, donated a silver pyx and 3 silver candlesticks to the convent between 1725 and 33. On behalf of her sisters, Bridget and Anne Lynch, both professed nuns of the order, all of whom are named on the lengthy inscriptions, both on this and on the candlesticks. They also bear the hallmarks of Mark Fallon, who seemed to have been one of the preferred silversmiths. Finally, in the Winter Tour Museum in Delaware, USA, is an exquisite 12-branch silver chandelier dated around 1740. This inscribed chandelier, complete with candle cups, was made for the Dominican convent in Galway, probably by Mark Fallon, the local goldsmith. It was unfortunately sold by the convent in 1893, probably because they needed the money, but it is a stunning piece. The memorial inscription on the chandelier asks for a pair for John Lynch of Bordeaux, as well as for his wife, and again for his two sisters Bridget and Anne Lynch. So before concluding, I'd just like to speculate a bit about the lost reliquary of St Jarlath, patron saint of Tuam. This was kept in a small shrine chapel called Temple na Screen in Tuam. It appears that the mortal remains of the saint were enclosed in a shrine and placed there where it was revered for centuries. Temple na Screen no longer survives, but references to the church of the Relics of St Ursula and the parish church called the Custodia of the Relics of St Ursula are frequently mentioned in papal documents throughout the 15th century, as the rights to the perpetual vicarage of the church were contested, no doubt because of the income generated by pilgrims visiting the shrine chapel. The so-called Shrine of St Jarlath was supposedly rediscovered amongst the ruins of the small mortuary chapel known as Temple na Screen about 1650. It was described then as a chest consisting of silver plates. It was rediscovered in 1650 by some men who were threshing corn in the roofless chapel, then used as a barn. They came across the reliquary and gave it to the parish priest, who in turn passed it to John Burke, Archbishop of Tuam. In 1655, Archbishop Burke in turn transferred its care, along with an image of the Virgin Mary, to Malachy O'Connor. It was kept by the O'Connors at their home in Silon outside Cong until 1803. At some stage thereafter, it was taken to Claremorris, County Mayo, by one of the family, a Captain Donnellan, who had it in his possession and kept it at his residence until 1831, when he died as victim of a cholera. On his death, the reliquary disappears. There's no further reference to it. So it's amazing that such an object would have survived up until 1831 and then just simply disappears. This casket or shrine, then all we know was the description that was given in the accounts of the time as being a rare piece of antique workmanship, a pentagonal or seven-sided built chest, beautifully carved in solid silver, inlaid with gold and ornamented by choice designs. Now, what was puzzling me about that, how could it be pentagonal and seven-sided? It didn't make any sense. But if you actually then just sort of take a step back and think about it, the description of the reliquary as being composed of silver inlaid with gold and pentagonal and seven-sided suggests that it took the form of a tomb or house-shaped shrine of a type that we've seen already, such as this one here from the Brac Mayo. You can see that in section it's five-sided, but when you actually count up the number of faces, there's two faces on the roof, one the front and the back, the base, and the two ends, so that makes seven. So that's how you reconcile the 5 and the 7. So perhaps what we were looking at is something of this size. Interestingly, on the base of the shrine of the Brac Mogue are one of these openwork plaques which are characteristic of 11th and 12th century Irish reliquaries. So what can we say about the decoration of this lost reliquary? And I think the answer may be found by examining 2 silver chalices made by Galway silversmiths in the early decades of the 18th century. The John and Agnes Joyce chalice was made in 1701 for the convent of Poor Clares in Galway. It is possibly, though not certainly, the work of Richard Joyce, the same silversmith who made the reliquary for the head of St Ursula. On 4 of the faces of the octagonal foot is a stamped design forming a grille of step patterns, such as we've seen just earlier. The same device, this is 1701, the same device is seen on the foot of the Stephen Kerwin chalice, made in 1718, and bearing the hallmarks of Bartholomew Fallon, silversmith of Galway. It is known that Fallon and Joyce sometimes worked on the same objects. This chalice, formerly in the possession of the Kerwin family of Dalgantoom, was recently, I'm glad to say, acquired by the National Museum of Ireland. The decorative geometric design on both of these chalices is unique in Irish 18th century metalwork. There's nothing else like it, and it's quite unlike any other decoration found in metalwork of the period. So what then was its inspiration? The particular pattern here, once you actually look at it in detail, is identical to that found on earlier Irish metalwork, specifically the design corresponding to type D shown here, E I should say, of Henry Crawford's classification of openwork designs on Irish medieval reliquaries. It is found, for example, on 11th century shrines such as the Sushkil Malasha, the Shrine of the Stomisl and the Cahach, all fitted with openwork panels bearing exactly the same design as those found in the Joyce and silver and Kerwin chalices. It would appear, therefore, that the silversmiths of Galway in the early 18th century had access to an object with a geometric pattern similar to that found in Irish reliquaries of the 11th and 12th centuries. As no published account of these early medieval objects appeared in print before the beginning of the 19th century, either Richard Joyce or Bartholomew Fallon, or both, must have had access to an object with this particular form of pierced decoration and recognised as an ancient object of Irish manufacture, sometime in the early years of the 18th century. And could this possibly have been, could this object that inspired them possibly be the now lost silver reliquary of St Jarlath? There is some evidence that these Galway silversmiths were involved in the repair of older objects, for example, a chalice of 1648, so this would be half a century older than the chalices we've been talking about so far, made for the convent of Morris, County Mayo, bears the initials of Richard Joyce. The maker of the chalice could not have been the Joyce that we're talking about, and it is highly probable that Joyce repaired this chalice or added to it in the early 18th century, and then stamped his own initials on its foot. And in fact, the chalice, and I don't have a picture of it, has later a knop and stem, possibly the work of Richard Joyce. Joyce or Fallon could therefore have seen the reliquary of St Jarlath while it was kept by the O'Connors of Silent near Cong, County Mayo, in the 18th century. So I leave it there, and just if anybody has any information on this missing relic of St Jarlath, or anything that takes its history further than 1831, I'd very much like to hear about it. But thank you very much. And